for joining us on the What Can You Do Right Now workshop, where we are helping you get relevant, practical information you can apply in your business today. In October, we had Blake Maxwell with Maxwell Agency talking about leveraging technology for employee benefits and HR. So if you missed that last workshop, check it out on our YouTube channel. Today, we have our very own Phil Chun, who heads up our consulting department, focusing on operations and people development. Phil has a background in HR, project management, operations, and organizational leadership. He's currently working with several of our clients to refine their operations and create clear and efficient organizational structure. So thanks so much for being with us, Phil.
Glad to be there.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about you and your backgrounds.
Yeah, so I've kind of popped around quite a bit, but overall, I started in human services doing organizational development. So it was a day program for adults with developmental disabilities. I helped train a lot of their management team and build culture around that. And then I hopped over to manufacturing, specifically women's clothing as a project manager. I wanted to initially jump into a totally different industry just to get a better idea of how other businesses do their workflows. And so why not go from human services to manufacturing? And so, yeah, jumped into that and worked a lot in the warehouse with their fulfillment and their and helped start 2 e-commerce brands. And then after a few years, I jumped into the restaurant industry because I love food, and was the director of HR for a restaurant group here in Orange County. And then finally ended up at a crew as an operational consultant.
That is quite a lot of varied experience.
Yeah.
Which we love here because we work with a lot of different kinds of clients. So it's really lovely to have some like diverse experience, different kinds of companies, different size companies, different management styles. So for the right now times, I feel like the way that we hire has shifted. But are you seeing that? Like, what does the hiring landscape kind of look like in the COVID times?
Yeah, I think especially with the clients that we work with, hiring is it's a little bit of a double-edged sword right now. You know, as a lot of people know, there's a lot of layoffs happening for many different reasons, whether that's lack of cash flow or just you know, businesses with uncertainty because of COVID. So it's a bit of a weird time because you have a lot of applicants out there who are looking for work, but at the same time, because of the uncertainty of the economy, I would say that businesses are a lot more careful with their hiring. And so they're really looking at their overhead and looking at, okay, let's look at our budgets again. Do we really need this person? Can some of these job duties be reallocated? And so although it is a very ripe hiring market, it's not really like a happy hiring market right now. I think for most business owners, there's a lot of stress that kind of comes with needing more employees.
Yeah, well, I think there's also a big shift in the before times. You would talk to someone in person,
Yes.
or they would, you know, leave a resume, or you know, you'd at least have some interview where they came out. Maybe you'd show them the office. But now that's not really how we operate. So what does that look like in this kind of shift to remote work as much as that's possible?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you bring up a good point. A lot of the culture things you might see from an applicant by walking them through your halls and showing them around to just in-person interviews. It is a very different hiring time right now in regards to how people want to hire from both sides of the table. You know, in regards to applicants, you have a really wide range of applicants, some who are totally fine with coming in and shaking hands, and some who are very wary of doing that. And so I think for most businesses, the necessity or the need to hire remotely and interview via Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever it may be has become a very important reality, that even if that's not how you do most of your interviewing, you need to have it in your arsenal to be able to do so.
Totally. Yeah. I think even just from a time constraint, I think because there are so many applicants now, there are so many people looking for work. If you have one position open and you are flooded with applicants, like how do you even navigate that in the COVID times? I don't know. It's that's a fun challenge for people like you. Is now a good time to hire if you are actually looking for someone? I feel like we're kind of touching on that, but do you think it is and why?
Yeah, I think it is a good time to hire, but I think a lot of that answer is dependent on what your company is ready for. I think what this time has done for a lot of business owners is reassess their workflows. Again, the reallocation of job duties across their teams if they need to have smaller teams. But also on the flip side, for applicants, for some reason, a common theme that I'm hearing is applicants are really thinking about, they're almost having like a little bit of like a midlife crisis. Whether that's because they spend so much time at home now, maybe they don't have social activities to look forward to or whatever it may be. The question has really become, am I happy doing what I'm doing? What kind of company do I want to work for? And I think especially with those thoughts, culture has really become really an important part of communicating why someone might want to work at your company.
Yeah. Well, when those business owners are looking at those potential applicants, what are some of the factors that they should be looking at? Like how can they filter through if they have a huge pool of applicants? Like what do we do?
Yeah, definitely. So I think for me, I've been in HR in a lot of different aspects, either as the director of HR or just part of the HR team while in operations. And I would say a couple of years ago, I ascribed to the philosophy of no more in-person first round interviews. A lot of that is because first round interviews are really difficult on both sides. So as an applicant, you're really nervous. If you've applied to a lot of jobs, you're trying to decide which ones to interview for. But I think also importantly, on the side of the business owner, a lot can happen in first round interviews that make it really difficult or time consuming. People might not show up. You might be trying to going back and forth scheduling times. And then more importantly, you are trying to sift through millions of interviews. And so a lot of times what happens is you might look at an interview or a resume and realize right when the moment the applicant walks in that you think they might not be a good fit. And so a lot of, depending on, the needs for the position, sifting through all those resumes and interviews is really time consuming. And so the model that I always encourage all of our clients or whoever may be is implementing one-way pre-recorded interviews. And essentially what that looks like is there are different softwares that do it. The one that I like is SparkHire. It's a really simple tool to use. But essentially what you do is you post your job online. You have a link that redirects to a website that people can go to. And essentially what it says is, okay, this is the position, click this button to start the interview. And it broadcasts maybe 5 or 6 questions that you might have pre-recorded. So, the first one can be, tell me a little bit about yourself. It counts down on the screen and it starts to record, and the applicant has a few minutes or so to record the answer. And some softwares, they can re-record and whatever it may be. But essentially what it does is it eliminates the need for in-person first round interviews. And as a business owner, it creates a huge bank of first round interviews that you can scroll through. You can watch the whole thing. If you feel like right off the bat, you can stop watching after 5 seconds, whatever you want to do. Yeah.
Well, I think that also takes that personal element out of the initial filtering process of, if you've had someone come out and meet with you, or you've taken the time to do, a one-on-one on Zoom, it kind of implies that you feel like this is going somewhere. If you went on the first date and then now you just aren't going to ask them out again. And so it feels more awkward than, if you just essentially you leave a voicemail and they don't call you back, it's less awkward than like they took you out, they bought you some drinks, and then you never heard from them again.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think on the employer side, it just removes a lot of that anxiety of like, you want to find someone, but also there's a lot of frogs that have to get kissed in that process. Like, if it can be virtual frogs that don't know that you're not interested in kissing them, that sounds a lot better. So for that first round interview, what are some of the things that you should be looking for? Like, what are some of the questions that you should be asking or putting into the app to have those applicants talk about?
Yeah, so I think, with companies who have never done pre-recorded first round interviews, the or the content of the question becomes really, really important. And I think the easiest way to think about your first round interview when you're using a program like SparkHire is deciding what it is you want to know. And I think one of the easiest ways to think about it is in your first round interview, do you want to know if they're going to be a good culture fit, or do you want to know if they're going to be a good technical fit? So, if you have a position that is more, uh, it's important that you know that they have the hard skills to do the job. Like for example, like an accountant, they need to know how to do accounting, right? And so you might ask them 4 or 5 questions. You'll give them like a, softball, like a easy question to start. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your past experience. But after that, you might do more technical questions. Have you used this tool? Tell me about different projects that you've worked on. The flip side of that is, if you have a position that you can teach the individual how to do the job, culture fit might be more important to know right off the bat. And so you might ask them questions that pertain to specifically the values of the company. What kind of employee do you want? How do you want them to act if that's really important? And then within those questions, you always want to ask what I call behavior-based questions. So, the very common one that people ask that I think is honestly just a terrible question is, tell me about your strengths. Well, I could tell you that I am very motivated, I'm very organized, and I work really hard, right? But when you ask it in a behavior-based way, what you're asking them, the applicant, to do is tell the employer about a time. So you might ask, okay, in your last position, tell me about a time where you used your strengths and it benefited the company, right? So then it becomes a much more practical question that the applicant has to think through and give you an actual answer. But also as an employer who's doing the interview, it gives you a better picture, a full picture of what that employee might look like in your company when they're actually operating.
Yeah, well, even just in that question itself, there's a lot to unpack because it's not just about a time that you used your strengths, but it's also about a time that you use them to bring value to the company. And so it tells you not only what they think their strengths are and how they use them, but what they think brings value to a company. And I think that tells so much. In fact, I think for us, we ask the same question in reverse. Tell us about a time you felt like you failed and what you did about that. And I think that's almost even more telling, which sounds really negative, but like it's a lot more telling. Like, what do you think failure is? How do you respond when you feel a certain way? I think there's so much to unpack in that. That's fantastic. What about issues in hiring? So like we've touched a little bit on, like, obviously things are a lot more remote now, but are there other issues that you're seeing, like, more broadly in just kind of the hiring process?
Yeah, I think some of the issues have a lot to do with the communication of expectations. I think maybe more classically before, um, employers are just trying to see if the potential applicant is going to be a good fit. But I think nowadays, especially with a lot of companies going remote, and a need for better communication, the better way to think about interviews is it a good match? And so I think something that employers don't do very well that we could definitely do better is take the time to explain to the applicant the nature of the job, maybe a little bit about the culture of the company, and just a kind of a detailed overview of what they can expect as an employee of that company. And so that way, that really, helps with the onboarding process. It helps with turnover because then you're really getting a good match for the company.
Do you think they need to explain the expectations in terms of whether that company has just shifted to remote because of the right now times, like and kind of explain what it normally looks like versus, what it looks like right now? Like what would you recommend for a company that has now gone remote but intends to maybe at some point come back, but they don't know what that looks like? How do you create expectations when you don't know what they are?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. I think the best way to answer that is in some ways on a need to know basis, meaning the information that you give them will better help them do their job. And so for anybody that's in a management level position, I would recommend that. You don't have to say, well, we don't know what's going on, and it might all burn, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be that, but it could be more so. We're very much in a transitionary period. We are starting to become a remote company, and so there are a lot of people might be wearing multiple hats for the time being as we try and figure out how to stabilize the company. I think anybody who is going to be in some sort of management position, it is important to communicate a part of that where the company is at. It doesn't have to be necessarily like financials or anything, but I would say more so communicating the current culture of the company. Um, for entry level employees, I think it is important to communicate that if it affects them in some way. So, for example, and it might be much more of a lighter communication. If your company is a newly remote company, you might tell them, something as simple as we just became a remote company from being a non-remote company for the last 10 years. And so there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve in regards to your onboarding process. But I think one of the ways that you can have new applicants buy into that process is also putting it on them that you need their help, meaning you want their feedback. You want them to be a part of the process that makes the company better as well.
That's so great. I think anytime that you can get people bought into the process or feeling like they're an active participant in the process, they will be much more engaged in that and I think take a lot more ownership in it. I would probably imagine it's also a focus on what you do know and not wildly speculating on what you don't know. Here's where we're at now. Like, here's what I can tell you for sure. I can't tell you these other things, so we're not going to speculate. I can tell you how things are now. I could maybe touch on how it used to be, but probably more focused on like, here's what we're doing right now, and here's what we need your help with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times, applicants, sometimes applicants will ask, like, tell me about a typical day at your company. And I think when you ask that question now, most employers are like, well, it used to be this way, but now it's this way. And I think, when it comes to those kind of things, it's okay. Like it's okay to say that things are different. But like you said, that buy-in that part is really important. And I think where the match part becomes really important as well is if an employee decides that they want to be a part of that process and they understand that that's where the company is, the onboarding and the time it takes for that employee to become productive will be much faster because statistics say it takes anywhere up to 6 to 12 months for an employee to become truly productive. And that's not necessarily measuring companies that are remote. And so, we're in a totally new phase right now of how do you onboard people? How do you get them to buy in and be a part of the culture?
Totally. That is a shocking statistic. I think that's what makes this process so much more important is how expensive it is and how long it takes for someone to really get bought into your company. You want to make sure you're getting the right people in there because you're really investing in that person becoming a part of your culture and of your company. What are some mistakes that you see business owners make in this process?
Yeah, I think some of the mistakes that I see typically are, again, asking kind of too many softball questions where you're kind of leading the person on it. And I think a lot of times what happens is it is also when your personalities match. So the interviewer gets excited with the interviewee, and you start to delve down into more fun things, which I think is okay. The personality match is really important. But I think a lot of mistakes that employers make is making the interview process a little too subjective from the other applicants. And so, as best as you can, anytime you're collecting data, you want to have a very similar controlled environment, right? And so, asking the same set of questions is really important in the same tone if you can. I think the other mistakes that employers make is that they don't ask follow-up questions. They don't take the time to push the applicant to explain a little more about something that they've said. Um, Even if you ask a question that says, tell me about a time where you led a team to a successful project, they may give you a one-sentence answer that you might not be satisfied with. I think in second or third round interviews, it is imperative that you ask a why or a how did you do that follow-up question that I think most employers don't tend to do.
Do you also see employers erring on the side of either being the one that talks too much or being the one that lets the interviewee talk too much? Like, is there a happy medium between who's doing most of the talking?
Yeah, it is an interesting balance. Well, one of the ways you can eliminate even that as a whole is using a program like SparkHire. If it's pre-recorded, you just have one person talking, and there's no confusion about it. But I do think that that balance is hard to find when you do in-person interviews or even over Zoom, because again, from an applicant's perspective, you are selling them on the company. And so if as an interviewer you come off cold or short, you may miss the opportunity to really talk to a good applicant in the way that you've come off. And so uh, I think that is a hard balance to find, but I would also say that there is a need for some authenticity as well, because if you are going to be their direct manager, you should just act how you would normally act, because you want them to have a clear picture of the team that they're going to have.
Well, as long as how you normally act doesn't get you sued.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I mean, don't ask questions that are now illegal, but it is, I would say, becoming increasingly difficult, at least in the state of California, to interview well. It is an employee protected state. So there are definitely some limitations of questions you can ask about, previous salary and things like that.
Is there a good place where people can kind of find that information? I've definitely found myself in the, I don't remember if I'm supposed to ask this one or not.
Yeah,
And then asking it anyway, which is probably the wrong move.
yeah.
So is there like a good resource for the like, don't ask these questions?
Yeah, I would say in terms of website, the Society for Human Resource Management has been, and it's just shrm.org. They have been pretty much the leading source for anything human resource that pertains to any kind of new news or new policies that you need to follow in regards to mitigating any risk or any liability. That would be a good, really free, good, easy resource for employers to very quickly look at without necessarily hiring like an HR attorney.
Yeah, I definitely, I feel like there's some thresholds of like, okay, we're at this point, maybe we just know what we're not supposed to ask. And then you'll get to another point where it's like, okay, we need to bring someone in who knows what not to ask.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on kind of what size company it makes sense to then start bringing in some outside help to help with kind of these processes?
Yeah, I would say anytime you have 50 or more employees, it does get a little more complicated. And I would say that it becomes even more so complicated when you have more than 4 or 5 departments. Then, because you may have a large number of managers who all have different priorities and different styles, it is really important to bring in one person to help systematize the hiring process, especially the onboarding process and the interview process. So I would recommend if you have 50 or more, I would test the market in looking for some HR help. For companies that are smaller than that, I do think you can get away with um, the flexibility of doing things yourself without necessarily needing any professional help. But that being said, I would say that there are resources out there, even like the Society for Human Resource Management, that give you good guidelines of how to create a good systematized system of recruitment.
That's awesome. Thank you for those thoughts and resources. Do you recommend for employers like at a certain point to start having more than one person on the interview? Like, and at what point does that like I guess if we're getting one-way first round interviews, which sounds awesome, then once we get to that point where it's like this person seems like somebody that could be a good fit, let's schedule that second one. Do you recommend just that department head doing it, having more than one person? What's kind of the best practice?
Yeah, so I would always recommend having two people in the interview at the minimum if you can. Of course, depending on the size of your company and the allocation of human capital, you may not be able to. But I would always recommend in each interview, except the pre-recorded first round interview, having two people. Typically, I would say based on what you're trying to accomplish, your second round interview might be the direct supervisor and possibly a co-manager. It could even be across departments. It doesn't have to be the same department. And then if you can't decide by the second interview, if you do a third, you might bring in someone higher up. It could be your CEO if need be. And then some companies will as well bring in um, uh, like an employee board. So they may have just regular employees who are not in non-management roles that will come in and give their opinion about how they think that employee might be a good team fit, which is really important because also when you do bring in other employees for the interview, uh, if you do hire that person and they have recommended that person, there's automatic buy-in right away in regards to that onboarding process.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I've definitely seen that in practice where, sometimes managers might have experience in that technical field. Sometimes they're just great at management. So bringing in someone on that team who has that, like those hard skills to be able to, call it if that person sounds like they know what they're talking about, but they don't,
Yeah,
or have that person, maybe someone on the team that you are intending to kind of start grooming for management, getting to start doing these things that are slightly more leadership in, preparation for like, this is the path that you could be on. We're going to start including you in higher level decisions, so that you feel more ownership of this department that maybe we want you to lead someday.
yeah,
So I think that's such a great tip. I've definitely, my husband has been on some of those interviews. It's a real bummer for you if you make the wrong call on that. It's a
yeah,
real like, oh, and I said he was cool.
yeah,
but but I think that's a great learning experience too. If you're going to be someone who in the future will be doing these, getting to see it, experience the process, and then see the results of it is some really good learning too. Do you have any, kind of final recommendations for companies that are thinking about, hiring or just starting to think through their needs, for more employees?
yeah. I would definitely recommend using a program like Spark Hire because for the most part you are going to save time and money. Um, Especially if you're a smaller company that where there's a lot of uncertainty and you don't have as much time or resources for the recruitment process, I would highly recommend posting a job with and pairing that with some sort of video recording interview tool because it will save you time. It will also save you the headache of an in-person interview that you wish you had not scheduled because they're not a good fit within the first 3 seconds, but you have to sit there for an hour to respect their time and their investment. I would highly recommend SparkHire, but also I would recommend a program like SparkHire because, in these times, there's a lot of people with families that, it doesn't necessarily work between the hours of 9 to 5 to interview. And so A program like Spark Hire allows the applicant to interview whenever they want. It could be 11 p.m. Maybe that's the time where they have peace and quiet, that they can focus 100% on answering the 5 or 6 questions. And so I would say, especially for small businesses, I would highly recommend using a program like that.
Well, as a small business owner that this recommendation was made to, I was not so sure at first. And then I watched the first bad interview and I went, sold. I did not have to spend my time on this call with this person who I'm sure would be a great fit at another company and is completely the wrong cultural fit for our company. We didn't get their hopes up. We didn't waste our time. It's weird how the negative experience was more, you had talked about all the time we'd save and like all the benefits. And I was like, yeah, okay, I get it.
Yeah,
And then we saw the negative impact of what a bad interview was. And I was like, yep, sold, sign us up. Let's do it.
yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point. I was definitely surprised that that was what had sold you guys. Like you said, I brought up all the money you would save, the cost benefit analysis, but it was very interesting. I was actually a little nervous because I was keeping an eye on the interview stream as well, because I wanted to see how it would work. And, hearing your guys' response in watching the first round interview and how poor it was, and the relief that you guys had with the time and like emotional energy you saved of only having to watch a minute of it, I had to reevaluate how I was going to sell this to other business owners for sure.
Yeah. I think obviously we all want to find that perfect, person, but watching someone who's obviously not it and knowing I didn't have to, like try to make them feel good on the call and it was not the right fit. It was like, this is so great. I think that, for business owners, there's so much that is asked of us. Like it's not always even obvious to us how much we're giving in our time and energy and efforts. And so to not have to give some of that away to people that aren't the right fit so that you can save it for people who are the right fit is so relieving. It's lovely. So thank you for setting that up for us. I can definitely attest to the value that I've seen in it so far. And I'm really excited to see what that positive first round interview, what that like, yes, that's the person interview is going to look like. But it's been delightful to not have to kiss any frogs. Well, thank you so much again, Phil, for talking with us today and for sharing about Spark Hire. If you have any questions, if you would like to get in touch with Phil, here is his contact information as well as mine. And in our next workshop in December, we will be hosting just one workshop on December 3rd, where we will have James Timar, a CPA, who will be here to answer all of our tax questions in one of the craziest tax years ever as we approach that year end. We hope you can join us and pepper him with all of your questions. Thanks again, Phil.